On Monday, Washington Commanders defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio tweeted in response to a post about upcoming hearings on the events of January 6th, quote, "Would love to understand the whole story about why the summer of riots, looting, burning, and the destruction of personal property is never discussed, but this is hashtag common sense." Del Rio told reporters on Wednesday that he was just asking a question about events in the spring and the summer of 2020 that followed George Floyd's murder by a Minneapolis police officer. Take a listen.
Why are we not looking into those things? If we're going to talk about it, why are we not looking into those things? Because it's kind of hard for me to say. I can realistically look at it. I see the images on TV. People's livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses are being burned down. No problem. And then we have a dust up at the Capitol. Well, there's nothing burned down. And we're not going to talk about, we're going to make that a major deal. I just think it's kind of two standards. And if we apply the same standard and we're going to be reasonable with each other, let's have a discussion. That's all it was. Let's have a discussion. We're Americans.
Later on Wednesday, Del Rio apologized after calling the Capitol insurrection a dust-up. "I made comments earlier today in referencing the attack that took place on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, referencing the situation as a dust-up was irresponsible and negligent, and I'm sorry." Del Rio saying that in a statement posted on Twitter. "I stand by my comments condemning violence in communities across the country. I said that while also expressing my support as an American citizen for peaceful protest in our country. I fully supported all peaceful protests in America. I love, respect, and support all my fellow coaches, players, and staff that I work with and respect their views and opinions." RC joining us now. Ryan, great to have you with us. And I want to start with you. Just your take on this whole situation, Ryan.
I think the first thing I want to say, because a question that will be asked of players, I heard Keyshawn say he would have a hard time playing for Jack Del Rio. I could play on a team that Jack Del Rio coaches on, because this is going to eliminate the people that try to compare wrongs, right? They're going to be like, well, you play with, guys that, have been accused of domestic violence or sexual assault or all of those things. So I could play on a team where Jack Del Rio's the coach. Let's get that out of the way so people aren't comparing wrongs. Now let's talk about what Jack Del Rio said and why it's important. Jack Del Rio basically compared two things to make one thing worse than the other. He wanted to say that the community riots or the community protests after, whether it's Jacob Blake, after it's George Floyd, that these things are hurting the community. I agree with that. I agree that those protests shouldn't happen that way. But that doesn't make what happened in the Capitol any better. It doesn't make 138 officers being injured, both from the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police, okay. It doesn't make a situation where it is of national security as you are rushing the Capitol. It doesn't make it okay because there are these other things going on. That's what people try to do. They try to separate wrongs. And it's also, for me, the insensitivity in which he approached it. When you're talking about these protests, if you're speaking after Jacob Blake, there are people that lost their lives. Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 people during that protest. There were officers out there with AR-15s or officers out there with assault rifles policing the people who were protesting. And so now when you look at a person in Jack Del Rio that has to sit in the room in Washington that is 85% African American, and you have to know as a player, he is either not aware or doesn't care enough about the people he works with or the people or communities they come from to be smart enough not to say this. My problem and issue is when you're talking about what Jack Del Rio is saying, he's saying this, that one wrong is better because of the people involved. Now, you could think that's because those people think like him or feel like him or support the same things that he supports. Or you could think that's because those people look like him. Many of the people in the rooms Jack Del Rio coaches in don't look like him. Many of the people in the rooms that Jack Del Rio is coaching in have feelings and are affected by what happens in communities where George Floyd is killed, what happens in communities where Alton Sterling is killed, what happens in communities where Philando Castile is killed. In those communities, those people are hurting. Those protests come because those people are hurting, those people are tired, those people are undervalued, those people are mistreated. And when those people are killed while not being armed by police, it is about police brutality. And the reaction to that is the protest. The reaction to that is the riot. The Capitol was stormed because people felt cheated. And because those people felt cheated, people's lives were put in danger. And he called
5
that
lives were lost.
dust-up.
5 lives at least were lost.
The reason
Officers.
5 lives were lost. And the reason he called it a dust-up is because he agrees with those people. And many of those people don't agree with the people that he coaches. And so when I look at Jack Del Rio, he can't treat me a certain way. Jack Del Rio can't talk to me a certain way, because to me, there's always going to be an underlying tone there that involves race, that involves thought. And so whereas for Coach Dick LeBeau, everything he ever told me, I would run through a wall for that man, and that man could talk to me in every way, in any way that he wanted to, because he loved us and cared about us. He wouldn't talk to us in any way. He wouldn't treat us in any way. Jack Del Rio don't have that. Now, I've walked around ESPN with Jack Del Rio. Jack Del Rio never said anything to me to make me feel uncomfortable. But now I know how Jack Del Rio thinks. I know what he feels, and I will never be able to unsee or unhear that, and neither will the players in his locker room.
Fair enough. Here's the thing that's interesting, and I don't disagree with everything that you highlighted. I'm in accordance with you in terms of his level of insensitivity, particularly as it pertains to the George Floyd killing and the things that emanated from that. I certainly am glad that he apologized for the ignorant statement that he made in terms of calling the insurrection, per se, at the U.S. Capitol a dust-up. Highly inappropriate, highly insensitive, highly ridiculous. And Jack Del Rio should be embarrassed that those words came out of his mouth. But here's where I'm going to give a pause and leave Ryan Clark up there, because I want to say something to him, especially since you're doing such a great job with the pivot on your podcast and you're reaching so many lives with what you're doing. See, Stephen A. a little bit different. Let me tell you why. What would appall some people like a Keyshawn Johnson? What would make Ryan Clark say, oh, I know how you feel now. OK, so you can never talk to me a certain way. Well, first of all, that's not entirely true, because Jack Del Rio could have never talked to you that way. He never would have pulled that off. He uttered a syllable like that towards you. That would have been a wrap. So please, that was long before he said this stuff. So let's stop that. And he certainly would never say that to Sean Johnson. And the likelihood is that if he was directly communicating with players one-on-one, that would be different. That's not what the man was doing. And we don't want to address this, so I'm going to. He's white. He's not black. And there's an awful lot of white people that cannot in any way identify with the plight that African Americans feel physically, emotionally, spiritually, subliminally. The list goes on and on and on. When are we going to stop expecting them to do that? We have to get to a point where we look at a Jack Del Rio and what he said and actually be gratified that there was somebody that was willing to be open about their ignorance. Guess why? Jack Del Rio shouldn't be vilified. He shouldn't be somebody that's excoriated and nobody wants to talk to him again. You know what black people should be willing to do? They should be able to willing to walk right up to Jack Del Rio. Hey, how you doing? Let's have a conversation about what you said. Let me use this as an opportunity to educate you. Because if we're ever going to have any hope towards making this world a better place, making somebody cower and hide and muzzle themselves and never feeling free to speak up only disguises what they're feeling, which harbors and harnesses their ignorance. Therefore, they walk around feeling ignorant, being oblivious to the kind of things that plague them and us and our society, and none of us get any better. But when he was willing to be open, I found nothing offensive about what he said. I thought it was ignorant. I thought it was ill-informed. I thought it was foolish for him to think that. But I appreciated the fact that he was honest enough to say, we're all Americans. Let's have a conversation. He didn't say something, go hide, not want to talk to people. He actually invited a conversation. You know what that means, Ryan Clark? That means you and your boys, okay, with the pivot, should go and talk to Jack Del Rio. Because he invited you. He invited you. He said, let's have a conversation. So let's have the conversation, because this nation is never going to recover from the divisiveness that has plagued us, from the politicians that continue to feed that divisiveness that plagues us all while they sit up on Capitol Hill being indentured servants to lobbyists at our expense. We're never going to get better as a society if everybody gets to duck and weave and hide because they're afraid of the shrapnel of criticism that's coming their way. Jack Del Rio spoke. Neither of us agree with him. You eloquently articulated why you disagree with him. But now's an opportunity, because he said, quote, let's have a conversation. That gives Ryan Clark, a brilliant brother, who's done a great job in media, who did a great job, won a Super Bowl championship as a football player, who has credibility across the nation. That gives you and others an opportunity to walk right up to him and to say, let me educate you about this experience so you'll know exactly why we were put off about it. As opposed to somebody like my brother, Keyshawn Johnson, who's like, I could never play with him. Keyshawn Johnson's another brilliant brother. What do you mean you can't play for him? You can't talk to him? You can't correct him? So somebody makes a mistake, they're foolish, their ignorance gets exposed, and you want to cut them off forever? No, that's not how we're going to get better. We get better by taking the license to educate those who need to be educated, especially when they give us the opportunity to do so.